Well, our subject tonight is in or out, and relating, of course, to the Brexit, the exit of Britain from the European Union. Now, make no mistake about this. This is a very fundamental issue. This is not a storm in a teacup. Now, the Brexit vote could change everything and plunge Europe into a financial chaos. That, in fact, is how it is seen. So then, how it will turn out, which way the dice will roll, we don't know as yet. Nevertheless, a referendum is in fact a barometer. It's a barometer to the heart and the soul of a nation, but it is not legally binding. So that whatever decision is made here to maybe Brexit has to be ratified through the British Parliament. Nevertheless, David Cameron has said that he will abide by the decision. Now, the latest polls show that in or out is almost equal. It's virtually close on 50-50, so nobody knows which way it will go. Nevertheless, there are issues involved. And what we believe is that what will come forth is probably the deep-seated heart and soul of that nation. And that's not unassociated or disconnected with its history. So what we want to do is we want to discover for just a couple of minutes what is that deep-seated heart and soul of the British Empire or the British people. And what you see there is the symbol of Rule Britannia. The woman there is described as the goddess of Britannia. She's seen with a pitchfork. She has a shield. And her name probably is very much associated with Boadicea, who wrought victory in the 1st century against the Romans, or at least partial victory, until she was overthrown. Now, this particular emblem is very, very deep-seated in the heart of that nation. And the music there is very, very much loved by British people, but we'll just keep that down for a moment. Now, the symbol, and this girl that's pictured here, who was seen originally as a goddess but associated with Boadicea, represents raw courage. It represents fearless self-determination. It represents fighters to the death and fighters for freedom and independence. Rule Britannia became known as that song and that icon which represents keeping Britain apart from Europe. Britain apart from Europe, and that is the issue of today. So then let's move on, and what we're going to see is that spirit is not dead. Some of you in this hall will remember Margaret Thatcher, who in 1982 stood up with that same spirit of Britannia and sent a fleet of English naval vessels right down the other end of the world and there to rescue the Falkland Islands against the Argentinians. That is the spirit of this nation. And she stood up with resolve and courage and in the end won the day. Now, before we actually move into this subject, we want to just simply indicate our position as Christadelphians, which our chairman has somewhat mentioned tonight. We don't have any political affiliation. We do not know the result of this coming referendum. It could go one way or the other. It is a 50-50 situation at the moment. Our platform is our knowledge, a platform rather, of knowledge and presentation is Bible-based. That's where our skills are, perhaps. We believe that God rules in the kingdom of men and that his will is sovereign. This is God's decision, and we want to show you tonight why. And then finally, we believe that Bible prophecy reveals to mankind the purpose of God with this earth. So if we want to know what God's position is, then we have to read our Bibles. And so we want to now just draw closer to the situation and try and understand what is gripping this nation and why indeed it is so important, not only to Britain and to Europe, but the whole of this world. Before we do move on, the Christadelphian position has always been, since 1847, that Britain will be no part of the European Union, of the empire that will be raised up in that old Roman territory. So then, signing a new constitution for Europe. This is really what it's about. On the 29th of October 2014, a momentous step forward was taken by the EU heads of state and government who gathered together in Rome for the signing of the Constitution. Now, the signing took place in the reception hall in Rome under the raised hand of Pope Innocent, indicating the presence of the Church, and its objective was to unite all Europe together in a modern version of a Roman Empire, and that was to include Britain. Now, in 2003, it was Tony Blair who officially took Britain into that union. So the Constitution now marks a new phase in EU matters. It binds the members together more completely, politically, than any other previous treaties which have dealt with such matters as economy, justice, police affairs, and the Constitution incorporates all the individual nations of Europe into one federal body and in a very real way fulfills the absolute requirements which we have in our Bible in Revelation 17 and verse 17. So Britain is now in it. And what it means is this, that the Constitution will mean that national parliaments will be reduced to little more than city councils. In other words, they will lose their own authority, and the whole meaning of a genuine democracy will go. This may suit some of those countries in Europe, but definitely not Britain. So let's go to Downing Street and see what the situation is from the parliamentary point of view.
On Monday, I will commence the process set out under our Referendum Act, and I will go to Parliament and propose that the British people decide our future in Europe through an in-out referendum on Thursday, the 23rd of June. The choice is in your hands, but my recommendation is clear. I believe that Britain will be safer, stronger, and better off in a reformed European Union. I've just chaired a meeting of the Cabinet in which I updated them on the special status we have secured for Britain. And the Cabinet agreed that the government's position will be to recommend that Britain remains in a reformed European Union. Now I want to speak directly to the British people to explain why. We are approaching one of the biggest decisions this country will face in our lifetimes, whether to remain in a reformed European Union or to leave.
So there is the official government position. Britain remains is their side. But looking at our slide here, the question is, will they go out? Can they get their control back? What are the consequences? And it's a whole mix It's a whole world of in or out and confusion. So that's the kind of thing that we see in the streets of Britain. Which way will we go? Now, you need to understand that, and this is quoting from some of the papers, this particular comment, Prophecy News Watch, the EU is a horribly anti-democratic, bureaucratic monstrosity. This is suffocating the life out of most of Europe and a little bit more with each passing year. So if I was British, and this is an American comment, I would most definitely be voting to leave the EU. Now, let there be no illusion about the trauma of Brexit. Anybody who claims that Britain can lightly disengage after 43 years enmeshed in EU affairs is a charlatan or a dreamer, or has little contact with the realities of global finance and geopolitics. This is not a small decision. Now, even after a trade deal, a long transition may follow. Senior EU and British officials expect a divorce. A separation could take a decade in total. We are not talking about 5 minutes. It is going to take a long time to disengage the enmeshments between Britain and the EU. So, are we going to see the spirit of rural Britannia coming to the fore again?
Ip's leader Nigel Farage, who's with me now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Starters' orders were off, as it were. Now, whatever you think of the Prime Minister's deal, he has at least fought the good fight. Let's start by being generous to him. He has argued very hard. He has been night after night fighting the case, and he's done all right.
Didn't ask for much, did he? I mean, all he's asked for is some minor changes to benefits and a couple of promises that might go in the next treaty. And the truth of it is, he can't deliver this deal because the European Parliament can strike down the benefits deal and the European Court of Justice can rule out everything else. So to say to people, please vote for this deal in a referendum when you can't guarantee delivering it, seems to me to be a rather weak position.
I think quite a lot of people who, didn't vote UKIP, who don't quite know what they think about Europe, are concerned but don't know the detail, will look at this deal and say, well, hold on a second. He has got a 4-year tapered break on benefits for migrants. Nigel Farage asked for a 5-year one a little while ago. He has got something on sending child benefit abroad. It's not nothing. It may not be everything, but it's not nothing.
This is not the issue. The issue is not migrant benefits. The issue is an open door to 500 million people and net migration running at 1/3 of a million people a year. And this under a Prime Minister who promised us he'd reduce migration to tens of thousands a year. The issue is the fact we're paying over £50 million a day in a membership fee, and nothing's been done to change that. And the biggest issue of all is our Parliament and our courts cannot strike down European law that's against our interests. They're the issues that people will make their big decisions on in this referendum, not the marginal issue of migrant benefits.
Well, let's start with
Well, let me shed some light on it. There is one absolute certainty if we vote to leave the European Union, and that is that we will be in charge of our own country. We will make our own laws. We will run our own ministerial departments. I thought Michael Gove's comment yesterday that every day ministers are told, sorry, Minister, you can't do this, it's against EU rules, shows you the extent to which we've given away control of our own future. We will be in charge. And if we vote to remain, we're voting to remain in a union whose currency is failing, whose migrant crisis has led, according to the chief of Europol this week, to up to 5,000 Islamist extremists coming into Europe in the space of the last year, and will be part of a Europe that wants Turkey to be a member within 5 years.
So then, this fellow makes a comment in respect to another requirement of the European Union, the EU. They're asking for more money because of the migrant crisis. Now, he said they're already paying $50 million a day. Now they want a whole heap more. Where is it going? Well, who knows? Now, throughout our 43-year membership, and this is again a comment from an English paper, of the European Union, it has proved increasingly greedy, wasteful, bullying and breathtakingly incompetent in a crisis. That is the European Union. The truth is that those extremely prominent European banks are headed for a collapse even without a Brexit. It's going that way. But if there is a leave vote, that will just accelerate the process. That is the possible imminent future. Now have a look at the positive side. Let's consider the sunny side, maybe, of a Rule Britannia. Let's be frank. Britain is an amazing country. We've got the 5th biggest economy in the world. We're a top 10 manufacturer. We've got incredibly strong financial services. The world wants to come and do business here. Look at the record of inward investment. Look at the leaders beating the path to our door to come and see what's happening with this great country's economy. There is a smiley face. The argument isn't whether Britain could survive outside the EU. Of course it could. And those who have said so is Nigel Farage, who you just heard, the leader of the Independent Party, and now Boris Johnson, who was the former Mayor of London. He is an MP. He does belong to the government, and he also has a view.
Political project that is basically going on now for decades, which Britain has been a member of since 1975, and I now think is in real danger of getting out of proper democratic control. That is my view, and it's a view I've held for a long time. I've written a huge number of articles about it. And when people talk about sovereignty, this is not something that is possessed by politicians. Sovereignty is people's ability, the ability of the public to control their lives and to make sure that the people they elect are able to pass the laws that matter to them. And the trouble is with Europe that is being very greatly eroded, and you're seeing it more and more over employment, over border controls, over human rights, over all sorts of stuff. And you've got a supreme judicial body in the European Court of Justice that projects down on this entire 500 million people territory a single unified judicial order from which there is absolutely no recourse and no comebacks. And in my view, that has been getting out of control. There's too much judicial activism. There's too much legislation coming from the EU. And so
you can see the story is the same. It's that downward suppression of those countries in the EU. There's a controlling factor. Now, in this comment here from the Daily Telegraph, here is an interesting observation. I know the EU is showing signs of unavoidable and ongoing crises. I also know it's administered by a cabal of highly paid yet blinkered and deeply anti-commercial bureaucrats who are not only unaccountable to voters but also in cahoots with out-of-touch political leaders harbouring an unworkable and untimely incendiary vision of European political union. So what is this comment trying to tell us? There is behind the scenes the faceless power men, the power brokers who are controlling and pulling the strings. And rest assured, it's centred in Rome. And a lot of that money that's being paid in finally gets its way there. Now, also we find that there has been a survey done across 10 major countries in the European Union, and on average, 42% of their population are disenchanted with Brussels, with the European Union. Now, there is a story behind this whole scene, and we need to understand it. And it's history, yes, it's history. We'll keep it brief. In England, the English monarch Henry VIII was that king who broke relationships with the Catholic Church in order to divorce his Spanish wife. And he created the beginning of the English Protestantism against European Catholicism. So there was a dividing. But that dividing brought a battle against Britain. Ever since the Bible was translated into English, exposing the fraudulent Church of Rome and thus launching the Reformation in England, there has been a consistent and unremitting attempt to turn back the clock and to return the country to papal domination. There has always since that time been this ebb and flow of conflict, so that it says some of the main landmarks of history are listed below, and there is a list there, but we're just going to note these. That was the Spanish Armada. That was the Spanish attempt to cross the Channel and to humble the British. Then there was Napoleon and his battles and sea escapades where he was defeated. Then there was the First World War and the Second World War. So all these incidents represent attempts by Europe to gain back control over the British. Rule Britannia, and that's where she became famous. She was champion of the seas and protected her island borders. Now, one of the attempts which we really all know, Guy Fawkes. And we read here that November the 5th recalls the gunpowder plot where Catholics planned to blow up King James I, who had arranged for a new translation of the Bible, which we call today the Authorised King James Version of 1611. James was to be blown sky high together with the Parliament. This was another attempt to destroy the English Protestantism, which was, of course, in conflict with Catholicism. However, violence and war are not always successful. There are other tools in the box, as it were, that are far more deceitful and powerful. And it's called humanistic socialism. And you can see there that Britannia is under threat. She's being choked. And she's being choked by humanism, which is being promoted by the Catholic system. And if you have a look at that cartoon to the top right, there's the Romish doctrine, which involves all kinds of perversions and corruptions and lies, all wrapped up in humanism. And humanism is all about taking God out of the heart of man, as well as his morality. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner, you will see Queen Victoria holding a Bible. And it was the Bible that provided the substance for British morality. And it was a very high standard. But it was etched and eroded out by this socialist humanism. And the morals of Britain today are no better than Europe. And in that way, this system of the European Union has gradually been creeping over the channels under the guise of Rule Britannia. And in the top left-hand corner of this slide, you'll see the Common Market, 1957. You'll see the European Economic Community, which it became in 1958. You'll see Britain joining the European Union in 1973 and signing the Constitution in 2003 and 4. So gradually it's being choked. And gradually Europe is taking over. And that's what you've heard on the slides before. Now it says here, a plan to unite Europe under the Treaty of Rome was commenced in 1957 and has gradually evolved to become the European Union that we see today. This United States of Europe is governed by Catholic social doctrine. Is sufficient to demonstrate that it is in fact the hand of Rome that pulls the strings and produces the menu. And in the top left-hand corner you see a Roman Pope basically giving authority in the Church of England. That's how far they've got. And now the British have a chance to make a decision about that. We want to just cover across some issues of Bible prophecy which clearly indicate what the result will be, whether it's June 23 or in the future, but what the result will be. So we've tried to gain a little appreciation of what the matters are. Now we want to turn to Bible prophecy. Now the cornerstone of Bible prophecy is recorded in Daniel chapter 2, where the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, who at the height of his power and his pride, he wanted to see that his empire would be perpetuated forever. But God had a different answer for him. And through the Jewish prophet Daniel, he was told that, yes, Nebuchadnezzar, you are part of that image, but there are many other empires that will follow. So we see here Babylon was the head of gold. Persia is the chest and arms of silver. Greece is the belly and thighs of brass. And then we have two aspects to the Roman Empire that succeeded them. So in each of these verses, we are basically told those things. So now we have an outline of world history in really simple order. And in fact, it has actually occurred that way. Now, our interest tonight will be around those feet, because that is the end times. All those other empires have come and gone. So in Daniel 2 verse 41 we read, "And whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes, part of potter's clay, part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay." So we've got a situation of iron and clay, which is remnants of the Roman Empire or Rome, and also of this clay, making up what we would call today modern Europe. Now it says, "And as the toes of the feet were part iron and part clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken." Europe's going to become a mix. It will become a mix, partly strong, partly broken. Now this is the point that we need to remember, that this image and the feet are going to be destroyed. So we read in verse 44, "And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." And he says here, and notice this, "in the days of these kings." Just keep a little memory note concerning that. Now in Daniel chapter 7, in order to provide us with more information about each of these kingdoms, then they are represented as certain beasts having certain characteristics. So there's the head of gold with a lion, there's the silver, the Persian Empire as a bear, there's the Grecian Empire as a leopard, and then there's some awful strange beast representing Rome. Now we want to come to Rome, the area there of those two legs and feet. And this is what Daniel says. In verse 7 of chapter 7 he says, "After this I saw in the night visions, and behold a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. It had devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all these beasts that we fought before it. And it had 10 horns." So we keep that in mind. Now this particular beast was evident as part of, or as the Roman Empire, in what we might call the early period, when it was under imperial rule. Now, an imperial rule is where you have an emperor, and he has absolute power. He was also worshipped as a god. And then as we move on, that empire was going to develop. 3 of those horns were broken, and up came a little horn, which was arrogant, which had a lot to say. "I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots, and behold, this horn had eyes like the eyes of a man, and mouth speaking great things." And that relates to the introduction of the influence of the church. So what we've seen in the first part of this picture was pagan Rome from BC 168 to AD 476, when that part of Rome was overthrown. Now, it was overthrown by 10 other kingdoms or tribal nations. And that's what those 10 horns represent on its head. So here's Rome now, and it's being basically overrun by these 10 other nations. And then eventually 3 of them fell, and up came the authority of the papacy, basically, and that introduced a period which we call Christian Rome from 476 to AD 800. Now, you might be wondering where we are aiming. Here it is. Those 10 horns, ladies and gentlemen, are 10 tribal nations, if you like, that invaded into the area of the Roman Empire and ensconced themselves there. So they became part of the empire. Have a look at Britain. Have a look at Britain. It is not one of the 10 horns. Now, those horns are listed here, those nation peoples, the Huns, the Vandals, the Visigoths, the Burgundians, the Gepidæ, the Lombards, Franks, Suevi, Alani, and the Bavarians, but not Britain. It is not part of that Romish system. Now, that's what we must remember. Now, those 10 horns represent the 10 toes of that image we just looked at. And that image is destroyed. So these kingdoms making up Europe are going to be destroyed, but Britain is not within that. So there is Bible facts. Now, just looking at that map, that indicates where these 10 kings have basically ensconced themselves in the territory of what was the Roman Empire. Now, time moves on, and eventually we must get to the end of the road. And when we come to the last book of the Bible, in Revelation chapter 17, we see the development of this beast. And now he has 10 horns, which we're familiar with, but now he's got 7 heads, and astride his body is this harlot, this arrogant woman who's in control. And she has that beast under her aura and her power. So we read, he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-coloured beast, full of the names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. See, there's our identification with this Roman beast. But now we're looking at it in an end time, our own times. And it says, in order to identify the woman, well, she was arrayed in purple and scarlet colour, decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. She is a religious harlot. She is an abominable and religious system, and identified with purple and scarlet and precious stones. And there's only one religious system in the Roman territory that can answer to that, which is the Roman Catholic Church. So she, in verse 5, is described as Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Now, we have our 10 toes and our 10 horns. And as we go through the passages here of Revelation 17, we are told that this early arrangement of the empire went into, as it were, perdition. But it's going to rise out of that again. It's going to be manifest again in all its aura, in all its horror, in the last days. And we notice in verse 12 of Revelation 17, it says, and the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings. See that? Which have received no kingdom as yet. Right? No kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. So they're going to come together and form an alliance with the beast system. Have a look again at the map. England is not involved. So then, verse 14, and this is what we keep in mind. These, that is, the 10 kings in that beastly system, shall make war with the Lamb. And the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. This is a divine intervention. This is Almighty God moving in through the King of kings and Lord of lords. That is his own Son and his immortal associates, who in the Bible are known as those who are called and chosen and faithful. Europe will be destroyed as we know it. But you see, ladies and gentlemen, there is a future for England, which we'll show you in a moment. But just before we do, this is how amazing Bible prophecy is. We're not telling you stories and fantasies. Looking across that top, we see the progression of this Roman beast from the pagan Rome going through Christian Rome, then to papal Rome, where the papacy was very much preeminent in the times of the Holy Roman Empire. And then we come to its final manifestation called Catholic Europe. And Catholic Europe, if you look just above that little name tag, we have a woman astride a beast. And when we represent the modern EU today, we have a poster of a woman riding a beast, holding up the flag of the European Union. And then coming across, we have a sculpture, a metal sculpture, which is placed in the front of the EU headquarters in Brussels. The beast, Zeus and Europa. So you cannot miss the associations of the Bible with what this particular system is presenting itself as. Just to make a comment about the heads. Going across the history of this Roman system, there have been 7 different kinds of political rulership. The 6th head there is from 27 BC to 476 AD, and it's an imperial time. Now, an imperial time, as you see on the photos there, or the pictures there, is the time when the emperors ruled. And as I said before, an emperor had absolute authority to the point where he wanted to be worshipped as a god. He was the protector of his own religion. And we are told in Revelation 17 that there's yet to come in Europe another head, if you like. It's the 8th head, but it's like the 6th. It's imperial. So we're expecting in the near future that the whole system of governance in Europe is going to change, and we are going to see an imperial system established. Who could be the emperor? Recognise him? He has imperial ambitions. He is represented here as a bronze statue, erected in St. Petersburg, celebrating his ambition to be that emperor that we're talking about. We'll visit that again just in a few minutes. Now, Britain has a future in God's purpose. Britain is not going to be destroyed as those horned powers of Europe. In Isaiah 60 in verse 9, we're told, "Surely the isles shall wait for me, and the ships of Tarshish first." Now, Tarshish is a name for Britain, which we'll just note very quickly a little later. "To bring thy sons from far, their silver and their gold with them, unto the name of the Lord thy God, and to the Holy One of Israel, because he hath glorified thee." So they're going to be involved with their merchant navy, bringing Jewish people back to the land after this European monster has been destroyed. Now let's just think for a moment. There are some very, very interesting issues emerging. That heading at the top says EU leaders are planning a post-Brexit future without the UK. So you've got to look forward. And what they understand is this, that closer integration in a post-Brexit EU is likely to take the form of tighter security and defence collaboration against the backdrop of aggression from Russia in the east and the threat of Islamist terrorism, enhanced by the war in Syria and instability in neighbouring Turkey. Okay, that's our world today. They know they need greater security, and particularly with the invasion of refugees. Now read the words in the bold. Plans to embrace the military role of the European Union, potentially paving the way for a future EU army. That means an army that could be gathered together out of 10 kingdoms and probably for a future purpose. And this is being held back until after the Brexit vote. Now, world leaders have been united in urging David Cameron to keep Britain in the EU, with one notable exception. Even Barack Obama flew across to London to address the Parliament to tell them to stay in Europe. Vladimir Putin says, come on boys, exit. One notable exception. Now we read here that Brexit would have strengthened Russia's position in Europe and increased Gazprom's grip on the European energy market. Yes, Vladimir Putin will enjoy the spectacle and seek to exploit it. So he's clapping those who are pushing for a Brexit. Now, British people, we are told by their papers, should reflect on the fact that the only leader who would stand to gain from a British withdrawal from the European Union is Vladimir Putin. Now, there are several reasons for this thinking, so let's just explore them. There are 4. The first is geopolitics. Undoubtedly, the destabilisation of Europe, the EU, is a foreign policy priority for the Russian president. He wants to see Europe in a mess, because then it'll get all put back together like those 10 toes and 10 horns, and he will be the emperor. Second, much needed EU sanctions against Russia are more likely to be dropped if Britain left. Thirdly, Britain has strongly supported an independent European energy strategy. Economically and strategically, it is vital for Putin that EU countries remain reliant on Russian vast supplies of gas and oil. He's looking after himself. Now the fourth. The fourth is that it brings his personal ambition one step closer. The emperor of a newly reconstituted Roman Empire. And we've seen that implanted in the prophecies of Revelation chapter 17. So you see, we are marching on. We are marching on the road to Armageddon, which we read tonight in Ezekiel 38. A time when the King of Kings and Lord of Lords will confront this great confederacy under the heading or under the leadership of an emperor. So we remember this. In Acts chapter 17 and verse 31, the Apostle Paul said that God has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. That man was his own son, the Lord Jesus Christ. God's appointed a day when this man, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, is going to intervene. Now, we read tonight from Ezekiel 38. And just basically to summarise, we have here in verse 2, Son of man, set your face against Gog. Now, Gog is a personality. He's a leader. He will be this emperor of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech and Tubal, this being the New King James Version, and prophesy against him and say, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I'm against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech and Tubal. Now, Rosh historically can be shown to be the most ancient form or appellation or name of Russia. It was the Rossite who actually evolved out of the territory of Ukraine. And that's why Putin is so interested in that area, because he wants to revive the roots. And it was in the Ukraine that they adopted Eastern Orthodox Catholicism. Rosh. Meshech is Moscow and Tubal is Tobolsky, two main cities, you might say west and east in Russia. It's the Russian. Now he says, I will turn you around and put hooks into your jaws and lead you out, and with all your army, horses and horsemen, all splendidly clothed, a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. He's going to put hooks in that man's jaws. He has to. Because you see, Vladimir today is developing a global image of being the protector of the Christian religion. He is the global peacemaker. He's just recently ferried down into the Middle East to calm things down, and then withdrew back. So then, in verse 38, with him is Persia, Ethiopia and Libya, and they're all with them with their various armaments, shield and helmet. Now notice as well Gomer and all his troops, the house of Dagama from the north, and all his troops and many people with him. Now I just want to explain that a little bit from this map. So basically, we would probably have a strong suspicion that this man Gog is possibly Vladimir. All his ambitions, all the way he's working is moving in this direction. We could be wrong, but we have a strong suspicion. Now he is the chief of Rosh, Meshech and Tubal, which are the appellations for the Russian power in the north. He is of the land of Magog. Now Magog was originally further here to the east, but then there was a migration west, and Magog is basically that territory of Central Europe. Germanic, if you like. And with Magog is mentioned the Gomeric tribes, Gomer and all his bands, which includes France and the lowlands and so on. So what we have here is a collection of nations who are going to join this Russian, and as we're told here in the chapter, they're going to make their way down into the Middle East. So it's a coalition primarily of Catholic forces with the intention to achieve what they've always wanted to do, could never achieve it with Britain, and that is world dominion. Now they have their forces in the south, as we're told here, so that we read of Persia, Ethiopia and Libya. So Israel, who is the target, apparently dwelling confidently, is surrounded. But we're also told this, that down in the south we have Sheba, Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish. Now the merchants of Tarshish, as it says, with the young lions thereof, represent the British power. It is not part of that amalgamation of European nations, that coalition. This is the truth. Russians have already moved a huge amount of armament into the Middle East. Vladimir has his footprints over Syria and Iraq. Not only has he moved this weaponry into the Middle East, but he is sending his ships into the Mediterranean. He has a port at Tartus in Syria. He is negotiating ports in Cyprus and Greece. He is negotiating another port on North Africa. He is surrounding the whole area and preparing for this occasion. And the arrows show there the directions of the invasion. And you can see that the naval presence in the Mediterranean is indeed horrific. Likewise, the land armaments as well. So then, notice down in the bottom left-hand corner here, we have the merchants of Tarshish. That's a World War I poster calling the young lions to arms. Now, the merchants of Tarshish are indeed, relates to the British power. Now, there are 6 things here which we can substantiate from the Bible that show that Britain is an island power. It traded early in the metals of iron and tin and lead. Now, we don't have the time to follow these out, but it is Bible proof that the merchants of Tarshish is Britain. Now, you can see on this map that boats left from Phoenicia, from Tyre in the Middle East, they sailed along the Mediterranean, went through the Straits of Gibraltar and finished at Cornwall in Britain, where, if you look at the picture at the top, that's Cornwall. If you look at the picture this side, they are ancient tin mines, and if you look at the picture in the middle, they are paintings in Cornwall of trading between the Phoenicians and the Britons. So the evidence is there that this Tarshian power is indeed Britain. Now, there's no other power in the world that can ever boast to be a mother lion with its cubs, the merchants of Tarshish with the young lions thereof. And of course, the Commonwealth of Nations will be involved in this. But Britain has long been known as a mother country and with its cubs, and as we see here, calling them up for duty. Now, I want to finish on this, the last part of Ezekiel, because Britain is not going to be actively involved in destroying that coalition from the north. This is God's prerogative. This is for the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Oh yes, there will be protests from Britain and Sheba and Dedan, those with them in the south. But it's God's battle. We read here, which is the last verses 21 to 23 of Ezekiel 38, and I will call for a sword against him throughout all my mountains, saith the Lord God. Every man's sword shall be against his brother. It'll be a mutual destruction. That's the way God works. And I will plead against him with pestilence and with blood, and I will rain upon him and upon his bands and upon many people that are with him, and overflowing rain and great hailstones, fire and brimstone. This is the artillery of heaven. And thus, says God, I will magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they shall know that I am the Lord. And that's how we started, and this is how we finish. That it's God's will that will determine what will happen in Britain in the next few days. But understand this, it is hugely important, because it may well open a window which tonight we have seen is the beginning of a pathway to Armageddon. So with that, we just finish on this, and Brexit is inevitable, either now or in the future, and for the benefit of our June the 23rd, they're going to make up their mind whether they're in or out of Europe.